I've decided to spend some time on some of the documents of the church that flow from those synods. I think those are kind of important documents, some on a practical level, some on a faith level, but they are very, very significant. So today I would like to do two things. I would like to talk just a little bit about synods, and then the beginning of priestly formation, and then 2 weeks from today we'll have the second presentation on priestly formation. We have either lived through or we have heard about the Second Vatican Council. The Second Vatican Council was a unique experience in the church. There had been 20 other councils, but pretty much the only people that knew about what was happening were the bishops who were present. Now that's in no way to say anything negative. It's just, I mean, this idea of modern communications is pretty modern, and it's, and so people in northern Italy really didn't know what was happening at the second council of the Vatican, the way we do now that we know everything, on the evening news. And so what happened was that this event that went over 4 years, it was talked about, it was presented, people saw it, and the participants, they were giving media event talks, what we had done today, and all of that. And the bishops felt ownership that, yes, it's about the Pope, but it's also about the bishops. And so what happened was, there was a shift that together they had worked for 4 years, and it worked. I mean, we have 16 documents that are now fundamental to our Catholic way of life. Be you religious, I mean, there's a document for religious. There's a major part of the last document that was issued, the Church in the Modern World, a large part on marriage that, helped us broaden our understanding of marriage. And so these things became known, and the church was eager to be able, first of all, to help Catholics know what the faith was about, but also for other people who weren't aware of what the church was doing, that they would know. It's no easy task to bring 2,800 bishops to Rome. Probably, unless the rules change, we'll probably will not have another council, or at least nowhere early. I mean, it strained the church with 2,800 bishops in Rome at these meetings, and then all of their advisors and everything else. I mean, and now, 50 years later, there are 5,000 bishops. So it's not just 2,800. Now, if you because every bishop has a right to be there. Every bishop has a right to vote. So, I mean, it's not like you can just take the old ones or the young ones or, whatever. I mean, if you're going to have a council, they all come. But there was a value. There was a tremendous value in having everyone together. And so early in 1965, the Pope came out with a document, and he instituted something that would not be a council, but it would try to replicate what happened over those 4 years. And it came from a Greek word, synod, walking together. Two words that really mean walking together. In other words, the Pope on the one hand, the bishops on the other, working together, not waiting for some major event that may happen every 75 years or 150 years. But it would be a regular event. And the plan was that it would meet every 3 years. And there would be representatives from the bishops of every country. The United States being a very large country as far as Catholics go, and Brazil and Italy and the Philippines, they each would have 4 bishops who go for a month. Now, that means a bishop is away from his diocese for a month as he's in Rome discussing, for example, priestly formation. Or next month we'll talk about penance. And then later on about the Eucharist, important parts of our Catholic life. And so this began in 1967. And it has worked, and it has brought together bishops from around the world who are prepared for it, because the whole thing about who's going to go is decided months and months before it starts, so that those bishops, they go through the preparation of reading, and because each one is expected to offer something there. It's not that you just go and listen. I mean, you're supposed to contribute. You're a bishop. Your job is to help the conversation going forward. And so that is what, the fruit of which we'll be talking about. But just for an idea that the Synod was something that came about in 1965, and every 3 years. Now, every once in a while they'll have what's called an extraordinary, Synod. And like what our Holy Father is doing now, because family is so important, that he has a meeting this coming October for 3 weeks, and then next October they're going to continue their coming back. Now that's the first time we've ever done that. Have 2 synods on the same topic in consecutive years. They haven't decided yet if it'll be the same bishops coming back. Whether or not they will, go to both, or you'll bring in other bishops to get another viewpoint. That's kind of up in the air as to what exactly, how they're going to handle that issue. Even if they're all invited the second time, I mean, these are older men. Some, for health reasons, may have to step aside and be replaced, or some could even die, in that interim. So, but anyway, that's a technical question that we'll get to later. Now let me talk about priestly formation. Priestly formation, of course, is very important. As the Catholic Church lives its life, the role of priest in the community is very significant. It is the priest who celebrates Mass. It is the priest who hears confessions. So that the structure that we have, that Jesus, when he, in talking with his disciples at the Last Supper, which tomorrow night we will have the Mass here at 7 o'clock, just a little preview, but, and when he said, "Do this in memory of me," he was empowering the apostles to be the first ones after him who would celebrate Mass. They were the ones, and then they ordained other people. They laid hands on others, and they took their place as the apostles died. You had others who were ordained Now that's a technical word, but what they were doing was laying hands on. They were choosing someone from the community, someone who was living the life well, was energetic and committed to it, and they were then calling them forth for service. You can only imagine that over 2,000 years, there have been many different ways of priestly formation. In the early days, it would be that a young man would attach himself to either a bishop or a senior priest, and he would take him under his wings, and it would be living with him and learning from the leader. And then, if it was, say, a senior priest, he would then present the man to the bishop and say, this man has lived with me for 4 years, 5 years, 6 years, and I have shared with him my experience. I have shared with him my teaching, and I verify, I say that he's ready if you wish to ordain him, to make him a priest of the Diocese of Galatia or wherever. And so that, it was kind of informal, and all that. As we get to the Middle Ages, it becomes a little bit more structured, but it's still pretty much with an individual priest. But then they were writing some books as to what had to be passed on to the new ones. And it was something that was done by trial and error, really. In the 1560s, now the 1560s are just after the Protestant Reformation, and one thing that became evident to the church was that and I'm not trying to pick on priests, but many priests were really not well qualified. They weren't qualified to preach. They didn't know Catholic doctrine. And so, now for 20 years, the church was in a council. And that was called the Council of Trent. And they did a lot of overhaul as far as the life of the church. I mean, it was not a pretty picture. And, you admit the truth, and, you go on, because the church then responded. It did respond, and that has come down in history as the Counter-Reformation. The church had a reformation internally and straightened out a lot of things. In fact, in the 1600s, we probably have had more saints than any other, century coming out of that Reformation, especially in France. Extraordinary enthusiasm, zeal, and people wanting to do the right thing. Be they priests or nuns or lay people, it was extraordinary. It really was, because people who had been upset about what had happened and how the church really had got some bad practices. When the bishops were together, they came out with a plan for priestly formation. And it centered around every diocese having a seminary. There would be an institution. It was no longer going to a senior priest. It was, we have, a place where these young men come and they live. And they learn about what a priest does. And so the whole format changed very drastically in the 1500s, and really has remained pretty much the same, except for a major emphasis and adjustment, which we'll spend some serious time in 2 weeks, about what happened in 1992. But that structure basically worked. It got a little stretched in the 20th century, but all things considered, it served us pretty well. Every diocese did not have a seminary. Some of the dioceses were small. And where do you get qualified teachers? Where do you get qualified spiritual directors? Where do you get a library of books? Where do you get a building that's large enough to put all these people? Here in Cleveland, we're very fortunate. We have two seminaries. They share the same big building. One half of it is a college seminary, and the other part is what they call the major seminary, where you are doing 5 years of graduate level work. So if a young man, if he graduates from high school and he comes to the seminary today, he's there for 9 years. It's a 9-year program, 4 years of getting a bachelor's degree, and that is in philosophy. And then the 5 years of theology. The priests live there. So right now, one of my big commitments is to have priests on staff. Now, even though we have, a shortage of priests, that ends up to be one of our more important positions, because they're the ones who day in and day out are helping to form these young men into being ready to be spiritual leaders. You just don't leave it up to chance. Oh, he smiles well. Well, I don't care how he smiles, can he speak well? Does he, is he a man of charity? It's those things that we're looking for. Now, I'm not opposed to smiling, but it's more than that. It really is. And we'll get into this a lot more next week, in 2 weeks. But that idea of a seminary, it was, back in the 1560s, when they started a seminary, it would be, classes. There would be prayer all together. There would be daily mass, weekly confession. And then as time went on, they started to add various involvements in the bigger community. They were pretty minimal. And it really isn't until the 1900s, because once you went in there, it was almost like a monastery. Even when I went into the seminary in 1967, you went in just after Labor Day, and the first time you could leave was Thanksgiving morning. Your parents could come and get you, and then they would bring you back at 7 at night. And so you went home, you had the turkey, and you get back in the car, and you went back to the seminary. Now that is loosened up somewhat, but it was a pretty, strongly structured, program, and yet it served the church for 400 years. That we had priests who were willing to, leave home and go to other countries and preach and teach and all of that. So, it's not like it was a failure, and you can't judge the past by the present standards. It was a different time. It was a different situation. But the church has always been interested in, informing the priests. The big change happened in the 1560s because of what had happened the 50 years before with the Protestant Reformation, where it really became clear that there were some serious deficiencies among many priests. In fact, many priests were incapable of reading. They memorized the Mass, but they really couldn't read it. They didn't know. So, but, remember, education, the idea of universal education is a relatively new idea. It goes back in our country, to the 1600s, 1700s. That, everyone should have a public education. You know, so I mean, it's not something that we've grown up with for 2,000 years. I mean, these are ideas that gradually, came into effect.